Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, and a new Pixar animated film, Elemental, just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So Elemental is a movie that kind of probes the question, do opposites attract? And the answer to that is probably left up to the relationship gurus. More pressing for Pixar Studios is, can it once again attract family audiences back to the movie theater, which has proven difficult in recent years due to some uninspiring, some duds, some controversial films, and they're hoping Elemental will change that narrative. Kind of true to its name, this movie possesses a lot of the kind of elements you would expect from a Pixar movie, I think for better and also maybe a bit for worse. There's animation and direction in this thing, an emotionally deep story, and kind of the more mature, like adult themes that Pixar is known for. There's also some kind of familiar tropes and motifs, like the whole premise of sort of anthropomorphized culture and world, which isn't as original as it once was, although it is still quite fun to see what they do with that. And unfortunately, there's also just kind of a few of the more like modern tendencies that have been reminiscent of like its more controversial films, like some LGBTQ representation and maybe some potentially questionable language. So why don't we get into this? Kind of break this down and see kind of what I think families will get out of this film. So Elemental is very much like a Romeo and Juliet romance. Ember is a fire element, Wade is a water element, and the two characters sort of unexpectedly fall in love. And obviously their budding romance poses some obvious problems, like the fact that they can't physically touch each other, but also even kind of beyond that, just sort of the cultural stereotypes or expectations that elements don't mix. And I would say this movie isn't necessarily slow. It's not a slow movie, but it's definitely also not action-packed. It very much centers in almost exclusively on that romantic plot and the development of the relationship between those characters. Kind of the subplot, the more action-y tension stuff that happens in this movie, like sort of a through line of trying to save Ember, trying to save her family's shop from being shut down from inspection, mostly just sort of serves as an excuse to bring these characters together and kind of send them different places. But it never really becomes the focus. It very much is focused on just sort of these characters. And I would say that from there are definitely a ton of sort of touching moments, emotional moments, I think kind of deep and well constructed scenes and dynamics. Although I saw this movie with my two 8-year-old twin boys, and they did grow a little restless, kind of between some of the more quicker paced actiony scenes. And just tonally for this thing, it is quite serious. There certainly is humor, and I think some of it is quite funny. It made me chuckle out loud in the theater. But the movie itself kind of lacks the classic like goofy sidekick character that can just sort of bring laughs all throughout. Kind of rather than like going for gags or jokes or kind of the humor element, it kind of leans harder into that more emotional story and like the visuals and this sort of the more emotional impact, because there's no and just sort of some more like chewy themes and deeper questions that it's exploring, because there's no villain in this story. There's no like external force or tension that they're trying to or character that they're trying to combat or fight against. Kind of all the tension in this is sort of more internal, the struggles of these characters in a very kind of more real world relatable struggles, and sort of that in the context of the more society-wide prejudice and stereotypes and dealing with mistreatment and some of those sort of more meaty themes, but kind of centered in the journey of these characters. And I think the themes themselves, and we'll get into them in just a minute, are wholesome and redemptive, although it does at times kind of veer a bit too into the preachy. There's lectures sort of on privilege and how that can come across preachy. Although overall, I do think like the themes are wholesome, and there is a lot to take away. I do think that if it sounds like it's a lot for children, it probably is. Not that the themes themselves are like inappropriate or for children, but even just the more serious themes, and then just the romance itself, very much at the center, I think in many ways will appeal more to, or at least resonate more with like older viewers or parents than it will with like puberty children. As far as content to consider, kind of things going on in the surface of this film, language, there's no direct profanity or swears, although there are several kind of related words or substitutes. Like one flame character kind of tells very bluntly tells another flame character to get off their lazy ash. And they kind of do that several times, not with that word, but like the flame characters use the word flame, sort of as like an in-world profanity, which obviously is not a profanity in our world. So the characters sort of are swearing, although it's in their own kind of context. And then there's some other words like dang or something dewdrop, or so they kind of use those words. But really, just that one kind of initial one is the most glaring, and the rest of them, I think, most kids won't even pick up what's going on. As far as violence goes, there's no violence. The most violent this thing gets is some like the water element characters like start to like boil when they get into close proximity to the fire characters, but like no lasting harm is done to any of these characters throughout the film, so there's no violence. Sexuality, there is some sexual stuff going on in this film. Just on the surface, the story is a romance, so it very much focuses on like these characters developing their feelings, although that in itself isn't a problem, even if it maybe goes above some of what a younger viewer will understand. Although there is some like LGBTQ representation, some characters. There are a couple that are clear that these are same-sex relationship. But there's also several where I was just unsure due to the non-human appearance. These sort of water or earth or kind of the different elements, you can't always tell what their sex is. You can't tell. So there's a couple that seemed like it was a same-sex relationship. But the film didn't necessarily establish that, and this visually, it was left a little unclear. So I think for the most part, younger audiences probably won't even notice, although there are a couple that, as an adult, you do know that is what is going on. There's another moment where there's two earth elements, which basically look like apple trees, and they're sort of spotted through their window, and they're like picking apples off each other, and once they're seen, they get kind of bashful and awkwardly say that they're just pruning, which seems like a very clear like sexual innuendo for something. And then later, another character talking about an upcoming date asks if there will be pruning, kind of jokingly. So they kind of double back on that joke. Ember's parents, kind of near the end of the film, talk about how they're going to have more time for hanky panky. So that's in there. And there's a scene where Wade, the water element, is talking to Ember, the fire element, and says that she looks hot and then smoking. And obviously he's referring to that like literally, although she takes it more as like metaphorically and like unwanted flirtation. So there is some kind of sexual stuff going on, although most of it isn't super blatant or even noticeable, but it definitely is there. Maybe another thing is this spirituality. It kind of does play a role all throughout this. Ember, one of the characters, refers at one point to an act of God, implying that apparently there is some kind of spiritual force or deity or religion in their world. And you see that most clearly with the fire elements. They have sort of their cultural religion, which centers in on this like blue flame that they keep in like a little dish in their house. And the characters sort of revere it and pray to it, and like very much treat it as sort of their their access point to whatever their religion or being is. There's also Ember's mother is essentially this sort of like a love psychic. She's shown several times where she like does readings of couples where they kind of light these candle incense things that burn up, and then she can smell if they're in love or not. And they kind of use that all several times throughout the film. Which the scenes themselves aren't necessarily depicted in like a super dark or any kind of like demonic sense, although clearly it is inspired by like real world psychic readings and that sort of stuff. So there is sort of spirituality stuff sprinkled throughout this as well. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this, I think maybe there's two main things that I notice. The first one is just sort of the balance between individualism and then sort of traditional family ties, and I think Elemental, the movie, strikes a pretty good balance at those two kind of the teeter-totter of those two elements. Because on the one hand, this movie very much has moments where it is sort of advocating, endorsing like a more modern individualism. Uh, Ember is very much has like her own dreams for her life, but feels trapped by like the expectations of her family, and that she has to kind of fall in line. And they sacrifice so much as immigrants for her to have the life that she does, and so she doesn't want to let them down. And there's scenes where Wade, sort of her boyfriend, is like encouraging her, essentially, although he doesn't say it this bluntly, but like to follow her heart and to just pursue her own dreams and not feel bound. So in one sense, it does sort of have that message, but on the other hand, sort of her struggle throughout this whole film is her inability to do that, to sort of defy her father's wishes, which very much becomes evidence just for her deep love and respect for her family. Kind of her one big fear is that she keeps saying is that she doesn't want to be a bad daughter. She loves her family. She respects what they sacrifice. So it does sort of balance those two elements. And it's kind of what came to mind is almost in contrast to Turning Red, another kind of more recent Pixar film, where in that movie the daughter very much had the same struggle, but sort of aggressively flaunted her independence in like her mother's face. In this film, Ember's journey through this feels a lot more mature and a lot more relatable. And again, in the movie, it doesn't ever state like how old she is or how old fire elements get, although it's very much implied that she's not a kid, she's more like a young adult. But I do think the film handles that theme in a way that like empowers sort of the younger character while also honoring the older characters. Maybe the other kind of main theme that's very much on the surface of this film is this sort of prejudice, racism, kind of the immigration story. Apparently, those things exist in all universes, very much, although it's set in like a fantastical kind of world of elements and some of that. Very much the film seems to have its eyes set on like some more kind of real world commentary and, or at least exploration of kind of sharing those types of stories of sort of the immigrant experience and sort of all the factors that go into that, because Ember, the fire element, is a child of immigrants. It sort of follows her parents' journey from their homeland, their fire world, kind of how they came to Elemental City and kind of settled and built a life for themselves, and kind of shows that the fire elements are very much consigned to like Fire Town, where all the other elements kind of live in harmony together. The fire ones, because they're fire, are sort of resigned to the outside, and they're excluded from attending things, and very much treated in like a racial way, or like a kind of prejudice stereotypes towards fire people, that they're sort of the outsiders of this society. And that's sort of the backdrop for like the romantic relationship between Ember and Wade, is sort of their unexpected romance and how they sort of navigate that in the kind of context of a culture that preaches that elements don't mix, and particularly Ember's father, who is very much kind of has resentment towards water elements, and kind of is sort of more angry towards the way he's being treated and the cultural stuff. And I do think the film, again, I think it handles this theme fairly well. It traces sort of the Ember's family's journey, where you sympathize with the hardships that they've endured. You understand their resentment towards the culture, although I think the film also doesn't endorse that or present that that her father's sort of stereotypes are right. Kind of the other side of that, Wade's family very much is depicted as like the very kind of rich, privileged people that don't understand the hardships of everyday people. And yet they're also depicted very much as like fundamentally good characters that are just trying to do well. So you do kind of see the good in both sides. And I think that for the most part, the film kind of lets their experiences speak for themselves, although at times it does become a little preachy. So in the end, I think this movie's fine. Kind of before the movie started, they have like the classic Pixar pre-movie short, which features characters of Carl and Doug from Pixar's Up, which also kind of reminds you of like just how great some of those original Pixar films were. Elemental doesn't reach those same heights, although I do think it is sort of a return to form after some of the more recent uninspiring films that have been coming out of the studio. I think some of the elements, like some of the the same-sex couples, or maybe some of the language or the spiritual stuff, might be enough to keep Christian audiences from going to see it in theaters, or just not sure about it. Although I do think kind of beyond that, there is enough sort of wholesome messages and just well-crafted storytelling, that there is stuff to kind of appreciate and enjoy in this film. But hey, if you guys seen this movie, take your kids, go see it by yourself. We'd love to hear your thoughts, whether you enjoyed it, whether you didn't enjoy it, whether you had questions. Jump into the comment section, so let's have a conversation about that. And I want to encourage you too, if you haven't done so, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. I got a lot of other movie reviews and live streams and fun stuff. Would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collider through World for Christ.